February 12, 1943. Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. The dawn of death. The morning sun cast long shadows across the coral runway as 24 dark blue fighters sat silent on the flight line. Major William Giz checked his watch. 600 hours. In 2 hours, these Vought F4U Corsairs would fly their first combat mission in the Pacific War. Not a routine patrol, not a training flight. An escort mission 230 miles deep into Japanese-controlled airspace to Vella La Vella. What none of the pilots knew was that this single squadron's arrival would trigger the most devastating fighter campaign in the Solomon Islands. The Japanese had ruled these skies for over a year. Their Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters had become legend, untouchable, unbeatable, masters of the air. That legend was about to die. The Pacific War had taught American forces a brutal lesson. Control the air, control the battlefield. Lose the air, lose everything. Since Pearl Harbor, Japanese pilots had demonstrated superiority in training, tactics, and technology. The Zero could outturn any American fighter. It could climb faster, fly farther, and its veteran pilots had been blooded in China, perfecting their craft against inferior opposition. The Imperial Japanese Navy's elite air group stationed at Rabaul represented the finest concentration of naval aviation in the Pacific. 700 aircraft pilots with hundreds of combat hours. Veterans who had swept aside the British at Singapore, the Dutch in the East Indies, the Americans at Pearl Harbor. Men like Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai with over 60 victories. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishiyawa, who would become Japan's ace of aces with over 80 kills before his death. These were not merely pilots, they were artists of aerial combat, and their canvas was the sky over the Solomons. The Tainan Air Group, the 251st Air Group, the 204th Air Group. These units contained the cream of Japanese naval aviation. Pilots who had trained for years before the war. Men who understood their aircraft as extensions of their own bodies. Lieutenant Junichi Sasai, commanding the Tainan Air Group, had developed tactics that maximized the Zero's advantages while minimizing its weaknesses. His pilots flew in loose formations that allowed individual initiative while maintaining mutual support. They had perfected the art of the turning fight, using the Zero's exceptional maneuverability to get on an enemy's tail and stay there until the kill was certain. The F4U Corsair sat on Henderson Field's dusty coral surface like a caged predator. Its inverted gull wings gave it an unmistakable silhouette, a profile that would soon haunt Japanese pilots' nightmares. Powered by a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine producing 2,000 horsepower, the Corsair could achieve speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour. The massive 13-foot 4-inch Hamilton Standard propeller required the distinctive bent wing design to provide adequate ground clearance. 6 Browning M250 caliber machine guns, each firing 750 rounds per minute. Total ammunition load, 2,350 rounds, 400 rounds for each of the inner guns, 375 for the outer pairs. Enough firepower to soar a Zero in half with a 2-second burst. But raw specifications told only part of the story. The Corsair was initially considered too dangerous for carrier operations. Its long nose blocked forward visibility during landing. Its left wing stalled before the right, causing vicious snap rolls at low speed. The tailwheel oilio strut had a tendency to bounce on carrier decks, launching the aircraft back into the air at the worst possible moment. The Navy had rejected it for carrier duty, declaring it an enemy eliminator. Yet these very characteristics that made it dangerous to fly would make it lethal in combat. The same power that made it difficult to control gave it unmatched acceleration and climb rate. The robust construction that added weight also meant it could absorb punishment that would destroy lighter fighters. Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh of VMF 124 had logged only 25 hours in the Corsair before arriving at Guadalcanal. A former enlisted man who'd earned his wings through determination rather than Annapolis pedigree, Walsh understood machinery. Born in Brooklyn and raised in Jersey City, he'd enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1933 at age 17. He'd worked as an aircraft mechanic before earning his wings, giving him an intimate understanding of what made aircraft work and what made them fail. The Corsair wasn't just an airplane. It was 14,000 of controlled violence. Master its temperament, and you held death's own scythe. The pilots of VMF 124 represented a cross-section of American society. Farm boys from Iowa who'd never seen the ocean before joining the Marines. College graduates who'd given up comfortable futures for gold wings. Former mechanics and store clerks who'd discovered an aptitude for flying. What they shared was youth. Most were in their early 20s, and minimal combat experience. They'd trained hard at Camp Kearney in San Diego, but training couldn't replicate the reality of combat against veteran enemies who'd been killing Americans since Pearl Harbor. Across the Solomon Sea at Rabaul, the Japanese prepared for another day of air operations. The sprawling base complex included 5 airfields: Vacanau, Lacanai, Rapopo, Tober, and Curvat. Simpson Harbor provided anchorage for the combined fleet, cruisers, and destroyers. The town itself housed thousands of support personnel, mechanics, armorers, communication specialists, and medical staff. It was the Gibraltar of the South Pacific, seemingly impregnable behind its ring of fighters and anti-aircraft guns. Lieutenant Teiichi Misha of the 204th Air Group reviewed the morning reconnaissance reports. American strength at Guadalcanal, estimated 40 to 50 fighters, mixed types, mostly obsolete P-40s and stubby F-4F Wildcats, nothing the Zeros could handle. The 204th had recently arrived at Rabaul to replace losses from the Tainan Air Group, which had been redesignated as the 251. Many of the pilots were veterans of the China campaign, men who had honed their skills against Chinese and Soviet pilots. They viewed the Americans as inferior opponents, lacking the spiritual discipline and dedication of Japanese warriors. But the morning's reconnaissance photos showed something new. 24 aircraft with distinctive bent wings, larger than Wildcats, longer than P-40s. Naval intelligence had no designation for them. Probably another failed American design rushed into service. The Americans were always trying to compensate for inferior pilot skills with heavier armament and armor. It hadn't worked with the Buffalo, it hadn't worked with the P-39. Why should this new aircraft be any different? VMF 124's first combat mission began at 800 on February 12, 1943. 12 Corsairs lifted off from Henderson Field to escort a PBY Catalina rescue mission to Sandfly Bay, Vella La Vella. The mission profile was straightforward. Provide top cover while the flying boat retrieved 2 downed pilots. No enemy contact expected. A milk run to blood the new squadron. The Corsair climbed steadily to 18,000 feet, their engines running smoothly in the cool morning air. Below them, the Catalina lumbered along at 2,000 feet, vulnerable and slow. Major Geese led the formation, constantly scanning the sky for threats. The Japanese had a habit of appearing from nowhere, usually out of the sun. He drilled his pilots relentlessly. Maintain formation. Watch your wingman's tail. Never try to turn with a zero. Use the Corsair's advantages: speed, firepower, and the ability to absorb damage. Hit and run. Dive and climb. Never, ever get into a turning fight with a zero at low altitude. 20 minutes into the flight, Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh spotted movement below. 9 Zeros climbing from the southeast, positioning for an attack on the lumbering Catalina. They'd probably taken off from Buin or Balalay, forward strips the Japanese used to extend their fighter coverage. Walsh's voice crackled over the radio. Bandits, 8 o'clock low, climbing. The moment of truth had arrived. 12 American rookies in an untested fighter against 9 Japanese veterans in the war's most successful aircraft. Walsh rolled inverted and pulled through in a split S, diving from 18,000 feet. The Corsair accelerated like nothing he'd ever flown. The airspeed indicator swept past 350, 400, 425 miles per hour. The control stiffened but remained responsive. At this speed, the Zeros couldn't follow even if they tried. Their wings would fail under the stress, torn off by aerodynamic forces their designers never anticipated. He lined up on the trailing enemy fighter, waited until the wingspan filled his gun sight, and squeezed the trigger. 6 streams of armor-piercing incendiary rounds converged at 900 feet. The API ammunition was devastating against the Zero's unprotected fuel tanks. The Japanese fighter disintegrated. No explosion, no fire. It simply came apart in the air like a toy smashed by an invisible hammer. Wings separated from fuselage. The engine tore free from its mounts. The pilot never had a chance to bail out. Walsh pulled up hard, G-forces crushing him into his seat, and channeled back toward altitude. 1 pass, 1 kill. The other Corsairs followed his example, diving and climbing, using their superior speed to slash through the Japanese formation. The engagement lasted 4 minutes. When the Zeros fled, 3 of their number were falling toward the sea in pieces. No Corsairs were lost. Not one had even been hit. The tactical equation had shifted dramatically. The hunters had become the hunted. The remaining Japanese fighters, probably from the 582nd Air Group that had recently arrived at Rabaul, retreated north at maximum speed. They'd witnessed something that challenged everything they believed about air combat. That evening at Rabaul, the debriefing was somber. The surviving pilots reported encountering a new American fighter with unprecedented speed and firepower. Their report was detailed and troubling. Encountered new American fighter type over Vela Lavella, superior speed and dive characteristics, exceptional firepower, cannot engage in traditional turning combat. Armor protection negates effectiveness of 7.7mm armament. Request immediate intelligence on aircraft identification and performance parameters. The report was the first acknowledgement that something fundamental had changed in the air war over the Solomons. Within a week, Japanese pilots had given the new American fighter a name, Whistling Death. The designation came from the distinctive sound the Corsair made in a high-speed dive, a banshee wail created by air rushing through the oil cooler intakes in the wing roots. It was a sound that would precede devastation, a war cry that announced execution from above. Ground troops on Japanese-held islands learned to fear it. When they heard that whistle, death was seconds away. The impact was immediate and profound. Japanese bomber missions to Guadalcanal, previously escorted by a dozen fighters, now required 20 or 30. Even then, losses were heavy. The Corsair speed advantage meant it could choose when and how to engage. Japanese pilots found themselves constantly on the defensive, trying to protect bombers while being picked apart by slashing attacks they couldn't counter. By March 1943, all 8 Marine fighter squadrons in the Solomons were converting to Corsairs. VMF-121, VMF-122, VMF-123, VMF-213, VMF-214, VMF-215, VMF-221, and VMF-22. Each squadron received its complement of the bent-wing fighters. The transition was not without cost. 7 aircraft were lost to operational accidents in the first month, victims of the Corsair's unforgiving flight characteristics. Landing accidents were common. The long nose meant pilots couldn't see the runway during final approach. They had to make a curving approach, only straightening out at the last moment. Get it wrong, and the powerful torque from the huge propeller would flip the aircraft on its back. But those who mastered the bent-winged bird found themselves in possession of a weapon that could dominate any opponent. The Corsair changed everything about air combat in the Pacific. The tactical revolution was immediate and decisive. American pilots abandoned the turning dogfights that had favored the agile Zero. Instead, they employed boom and zoom tactics, diving attacks from altitude, firing, then climbing away before the enemy could respond. The Corsair could dive at speeds that would tear a Zero's wings off. It could absorb punishment that would destroy lighter Japanese fighters. Most importantly, it could catch and kill any Japanese aircraft from a position of advantage. The Japanese tried to adapt. New tactics were developed at the training bases in Japan. Coordinated attacks from multiple angles, attempts to force Corsairs into low-speed turning fights, targeting the aircraft's few vulnerable spots, the oil cooler intakes, the cockpit canopy rails where armor was thinnest. But each adaptation was countered by American improvements. When Japanese pilots learned to attack from directly astern to avoid the forward-firing guns, Corsair pilots adopted the thatch weave, a defensive maneuver that guaranteed mutual support. When Zeros tried to exploit their superior climb rate at low speeds, Corsairs simply refused to engage below 250 miles per hour. On April 1, 1943, Lieutenant Walsh led a division of 4 Corsairs on a fighter sweep over the Russell Islands. The morning was clear with scattered clouds at 10,000 feet, providing perfect concealment. 30 Zeros rose to intercept them, climbing from Mabua Airfield. In previous encounters, such odds would have meant certain death for American pilots. But Walsh had studied the Corsair's capabilities and developed new tactics. Instead of engaging in a general melee, the Corsairs maintained altitude advantage, made coordinated diving attacks, and covered each other's climbing recovery. The battle developed into a vertical fight, with Corsairs diving from 20,000 feet, firing, then zoom climbing back to altitude. The Zeros trying to follow found themselves hanging on their props, struggling to maintain airspeed. At that moment, they were sitting ducks for the next Corsair in the diving rotation. Walsh personally destroyed 3 Zeros in 7 minutes, each kill following the same pattern: dive, fire, climb, reposition. His wingman, Lieutenant Archie Donoghue, shot down 2 more. The 4 Corsairs claimed 11 victories without loss. When they landed at Henderson Field, mechanics counted only 6 bullet holes among all 4 aircraft. The tactical equation had shifted dramatically. The hunters had become the hunted. The remaining Japanese fighters, probably from the 582nd Air Group that had recently arrived at Rabaul, retreated north at maximum speed. They'd witnessed something that challenged everything they believed about air combat. That evening at Rabaul, the debriefing was somber. The surviving pilots reported encountering a new American fighter with unprecedented speed and firepower. Their report was detailed and troubling. Encountered new American fighter type over Vela Lavella, superior speed and dive characteristics, exceptional firepower. Cannot engage in traditional turning combat. Armor protection negates effectiveness of 7.7mm armament. Request immediate intelligence on aircraft identification and performance parameters. The report was the first acknowledgement that something fundamental had changed in the air war over the Solomons. Within a week, Japanese pilots had given the new American fighter a name: Whistling Death. The designation came from the distinctive sound the Corsair made in a high-speed dive. A banshee wail created by air rushing through the oil cooler intakes in the wing roots. It was a sound that would precede devastation, a war cry that announced execution from above. Ground troops on Japanese-held islands learned to fear it. When they heard that whistle, death was seconds away. The impact was immediate and profound. Japanese bomber missions to Guadalcanal, previously escorted by a dozen fighters, now required 20 or 30. Even then, losses were heavy. The Corsair's speed advantage meant it could choose when and how to engage. The Zeer's 7.7mm machine guns couldn't penetrate the Corsair's armor. Their 20mm cannons, deadly against lighter aircraft, required sustained hits to damage the robust American fighter. But getting those hits meant surviving long enough to aim. And against the Corsair's speed and firepower, survival was increasingly unlikely. The armor plate behind the pilot's seat was thick enough to stop 20mm rounds. The windscreen was bulletproof glass that could deflect anything short of a direct cannon hit. The self-sealing fuel tanks could absorb dozens of bullet holes without catching fire. The Japanese response revealed growing desperation. Intelligence reports from coast watchers indicated that experienced pilots were being withdrawn from Rabaul and sent back to Japan to train replacements. But training took time, and the losses were mounting faster than replacements could be produced. The Japanese Navy's carefully cultivated cadre of expert pilots, men with years of training and combat experience, was being bled white over the Solomons. By May 13, 1943, Kenneth Walsh had achieved what no American pilot had done before. He became the first Corsair ace with 5 confirmed victories. The 5th kill came during a melee over the Russell Islands when Walsh found himself alone against 3 Zeros. Instead of running, the sensible option, he attacked. Using the Corsair's superior speed, he made 3 passes, shooting down 1 Zero on each pass. The last Japanese pilot, probably a veteran given his aggressive maneuvering, tried to force Walsh into a turning fight at 5,000 feet. Walsh responded by going vertical, climbing straight up until the Zero stalled and fell away. He then rolled over and dove, catching the Zero as it tried to recover. A long burst from the 650s tore the enemy fighter in half. 2 weeks later, Walsh's score stood at 10. The transformation was remarkable. In 3 months, a pilot with minimal experience in a rejected Navy fighter had become one of America's leading aces. The machine had made the man, and the man had mastered the machine. But Walsh was not alone. Dozens of Marine pilots were discovering what the Corsair could do. Names that would become legendary were being written in the skies over the Solomons. Lieutenant Robert Hansen of VMF 215 would eventually score 25 victories in just 6 months, making him the highest-scoring Corsair ace of the war. His technique was simple but effective. Get above the enemy, dive at maximum speed, fire at close range, and climb away before they knew what hit them. On January 14, 1944, he shot down 5 Japanese fighters in a single mission, methodically picking them off one by one as they tried to protect a bomber formation. The real shock for Japanese pilots came not from individual aces, but from the collective effectiveness of Corsair squadrons. The aircraft's range, over 1,000 miles with external tanks, meant it could escort bombers all the way to Rabaul and back. Previously, Japanese fighters had only to wait until American escorts turned back, then savage the unprotected bombers. Now, the Corsair stayed with the bombers all the way to the target and back, turning what had been milk runs for Japanese interceptors into deadly gauntlets. On June 16, 1943, over 100 Japanese aircraft launched from Rabaul to attack American shipping at Guadalcanal. They were met by 32 Corsairs from 4 Marine squadrons. The battle that followed demonstrated the complete reversal of air superiority in the Pacific. The Japanese formation included new Model 32 with reduced wingspan for better roll rate and Model 22 with improved armament. It didn't matter. 77 Japanese aircraft were destroyed for the loss of 6 Corsairs, a devastating 13-to-1 kill ratio that would be repeated again and again. Lieutenant Commander Tio Tanemitsu, a veteran with over 30 victories, survived the encounter and reported, "The new American fighters do not fight as we do. They strike from above like hawks, fire their terrible guns, and climb away before we can react. Our Zero is no longer superior. We are being slaughtered by an enemy we cannot catch and cannot escape." His report reached Admiral Yamamoto just weeks before the Admiral's fatal encounter with American P-38s. Another example of American fighters using superior speed and firepower to destroy Japanese aviation. The Corsair's psychological impact exceeded even its tactical success. Japanese pilots who had never known defeat began to experience fear. The distinctive whistle of a diving Corsair became a sound that triggered primitive terror. Ground crews at forward bases reported pilots refusing missions when Corsair presence was confirmed. Some pilots developed mysterious illnesses that kept them grounded when Corsair-escorted raids were expected. The mystique of Japanese air superiority, carefully cultivated since the war's beginning, evaporated in the heat of Corsair gun barrels. The summer of 1943 saw the Corsair's role expand beyond pure fighter operations. Marine pilots discovered the aircraft could carry bombs. First, a single 500-pounder, then a 1,000-pound bomb on the centerline rack. The Corsair became a fighter bomber, able to fight its way to a target, deliver ordnance with dive bomber accuracy, then fight its way home. Japanese positions that had been immune to fighter strafing now faced devastating attacks from Corsair-delivered bombs. VMF 214, the Black Sheep Squadron, under Major Gregory "Pappy" Boynington, exemplified the Corsair's transformation of air combat. Boynington, already an ace from his time with the Flying Tigers in China, understood both aircraft, the Zero and the Corsair. His tactical innovations maximized the Corsair's advantages while negating the Zero's strengths. The Black Sheep were actually a collection of replacement pilots, misfits, and troublemakers who didn't fit in with other squadrons. Boynington welded them into the most effective fighter squadron in the Solomons. The squadron's name came from their status as orphans, pilots without a permanent squadron assignment. But under Boynington's leadership, they became killers. In just 84 days of combat, VMF 214 destroyed 97 Japanese aircraft while losing only 12 Corsairs, an 8-to-1 kill ratio that would have been fantasy just months earlier. They also destroyed 21 vessels, from barges to destroyers, and numerous ground installations. On September 16, 1943, Boynington led 24 Corsairs on a fighter sweep over Balal, a Japanese airfield at the southern tip of Bougainville. Intelligence indicated a major buildup of Japanese fighters at the field. 50 Zeros intercepted them, rising like angry hornets from the coral strip. In the previous war, such odds would have been suicide. But Boynington had trained his pilots in energy management, maintaining speed and altitude advantage at all costs. The battle developed in 3 dimensions, with Corsairs and Zeros climbing, diving, and turning in a deadly aerial ballet. But it was a ballet where one partner had all the advantages. The Black Sheep destroyed 20 Japanese fighters without loss. Boynington personally accounted for 5, becoming an ace in a day. His tactics were simple but effective. Stay high, stay fast, and never give the enemy a predictable target. He would dive from 25,000 feet, often out of the sun, fire a burst, and be climbing back to altitude before the Japanese knew they were under attack. The technical reasons for the Corsair's dominance were multifaceted. The R-2800 engine's power allowed it to maintain energy in vertical maneuvers that would stall a Zero. At high altitude, where the air was thin, the Corsair's supercharged engine maintained power, while the Zero's performance degraded significantly. The Hamilton Standard propuller's efficiency gave superior acceleration and climb rate above 10,000 feet. The aircraft's robust construction, armor plate around the cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks, redundant control systems meant it could absorb damage that would destroy 3 Zeros. The Corsair's armament was devastating. 650 caliber machine guns converging at 300 yards could put 80 rounds per second on target. The armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate engine blocks, ignite fuel tanks, and shred control surfaces. Japanese pilots reported that being hit by Corsair fire was like being struck by sledgehammers. Aircraft didn't just go down, they disintegrated in mid-air. But technology alone didn't win battles. American industrial capacity produced not just aircraft, but pilots. While Japan struggled to train replacements for their mounting losses, America's training programs graduated hundreds of qualified pilots monthly. The Naval Air Training Command had expanded from 2 main bases before the war to dozens of facilities across the country. Primary training at places like Pensacola and Corpus Christi, advanced training at Jacksonville and Miami, operational training at San Diego and Hawaii. Each pilot arrived in theater with 300 hours of flight time, including 50 hours in type. Japanese replacements, by contrast, often had less than 100 hours total, sometimes as few as 60. The Corsair's margin of superiority meant even average American pilots could defeat veteran Japanese aces. The aircraft forgave mistakes that would be fatal in a zero. Its speed allowed pilots to disengage from unfavorable situations. Its armor kept them alive when they made errors in judgment. Lieutenant Commander Minoru Gendare, one of the architects of the Pearl Harbor attack and Japan's foremost aerial tactician, visited Rabaul in August 1943. His assessment was brutally honest. The enemy's new fighter has revolutionized air combat. Our tactics perfected over years are now obsolete. We need new aircraft, new training, new everything. But we have no time. They are killing us faster than we can adapt. His report to Tokyo recommended abandoning offensive operations and conserving remaining pilot strength for defense of the home islands. The recommendation was ignored. The arithmetic of attrition was unforgiving. Japan began the Solomons campaign with approximately 400 first-line pilots in the area. By August 1943, over 300 were dead. Their replacements lacked both skill and experience. American pilot quality, conversely, improved continuously. Each returning veteran passed knowledge to newcomers. Tactics refined in combat were immediately incorporated into training. The learning curve that had cost so many American lives in 1942 became a teaching tool in 1943. The Corsair even inspired innovation in other areas. Faced with the aircraft's initial carrier landing difficulties, the British Fleet Air Arm developed new techniques. They discovered that a curved approach to the carrier deck, keeping the landing signal officer in sight until the last moment, solved the visibility problem. A modification to the tailwheel oleo strut reduced bouncing. Improved pilot training specific to the Corsair's characteristics reduced accidents. By late 1944, Corsairs were operating successfully from American carriers, adding their firepower to the fast carrier task forces. VF-17, the Navy's Jolly Rogers, under Lieutenant Commander John Tommy Blackburn, demonstrated the Corsair's versatility beyond pure fighter operations. Initially assigned to the carrier Bunker Hill, the squadron was land-based in the Solomons due to the Navy's concerns about the Corsair's carrier suitability. It proved to be a blessing in disguise. Operating from shore bases, VF-17 could maximize the Corsair's range and payload advantages. Blackburn's pilots pioneered the use of Corsairs as fighter bombers. Hanging 1,000-pound bombs under the centerline, they developed dive bombing techniques specific to the Corsair, discovering that lowering the landing gear acted as an effective dive brake. A modification to the tailwheel oleo strut reduced bouncing. Improved pilot training specific to the Corsair's characteristics reduced accidents. By late 1944, Corsairs were operating successfully from American carriers, adding their firepower to the fast carrier task forces. VF-17, the Navy's Jolly Rogers, under Lieutenant Commander John Tommy Blackburn, demonstrated the Corsair's versatility beyond pure fighter operations. Initially assigned to the carrier Bunker Hill, the squadron was land-based in the Solomons due to the Navy's concerns about the Corsair's carrier suitability. It proved to be a blessing in disguise. Operating from shore bases, VF-17 could maximize the Corsair's range and payload advantages. Blackburn's pilots pioneered the use of Corsairs as fighter bombers. Hanging 1,000-pound bombs under the centerline, they developed dive bombing techniques specific to the Corsair, discovering that lowering the landing gear acted as an effective dive brake. A modification to the tailwheel oleo strut reduced bouncing. Improved pilot training specific to the Corsair's characteristics reduced accidents. By late 1944, Corsairs were operating successfully from American carriers, adding their firepower to the fast carrier task forces. VF-17, the Navy's Jolly Rogers, under Lieutenant Commander John Tommy Blackburn, demonstrated the Corsair's versatility beyond pure fighter operations. Initially assigned to the carrier Bunker Hill, the squadron was land-based in the Solomons due to the Navy's concerns about the Corsair's carrier suitability. It proved to be a blessing in disguise. Operating from shore bases, VF-17 could maximize the Corsair's range and payload advantages. Blackburn's pilots pioneered the use of Corsairs as fighter bombers. Hanging 1,000-pound bombs under the centerline, they developed dive bombing techniques specific to the Corsair, discovering that lowering the landing gear acted as an effective dive brake. A modification to the tailwheel oleo strut reduced bouncing. Improved pilot training specific to the Corsair's characteristics reduced accidents. By late 1944, Corsairs were operating successfully from American carriers, adding their firepower to the fast carrier task forces. VF-17, the Navy's Jolly Rogers, under Lieutenant Commander John Tommy Blackburn, demonstrated the Corsair's versatility beyond pure fighter operations. Initially assigned to the carrier Bunker Hill, the squadron was land-based in the Solomons due to the Navy's concerns about the Corsair's carrier suitability. It proved to be a blessing in disguise. Operating from shore bases, VF-17 could maximize the Corsair's range and payload advantages. Blackburn's pilots pioneered the use of Corsairs as fighter bombers. Hanging 1,000-pound bombs under the centerline, they developed dive bombing techniques specific to the Corsair, discovering that lowering the landing gear acted as an effective dive brake. On November 11, 1943, during the assault on Rabaul, VF-17's Corsairs shot down 18 Japanese aircraft, then delivered their bombs on target before shooting down 5 more during egress. Multi-role capability transformed the Corsair from interceptor to offensive weapon. The squadron's record was extraordinary. In 76 days of combat, the Jolly Rogers destroyed 152 Japanese aircraft, nearly 2 per day. Squadron leader Tommy Blackburn himself accounted for 11 victories. More importantly, VF-17 never lost a bomber they were escorting to enemy fighters. The protection umbrella was absolute. Japanese pilots learned that attacking American bombers meant facing Corsairs, and facing Corsairs meant probable death. Individual pilots in VF-17 achieved remarkable success. Lieutenant Ira Kepford became the Navy's first Corsair ace, eventually scoring 17 victories. His technique involved getting close, very close, before firing. He would dive on an enemy aircraft and hold fire until he could see the pilot in the cockpit, then unleash all 6 guns in a devastating point-blank burst. It was dangerous, but effective. On one mission, he shot down 4 Japanese fighters in minutes, each with less than 100 rounds of ammunition. The Japanese Navy's response revealed desperation. The new Model 520 incorporated improvements, heavier armament with belt-fed 20mm cannons, better armor protection, including a 55mm bulletproof glass windscreen, increased dive speed capability to 460 miles per hour. But these modifications added weight, reducing the Zero's legendary maneuverability without matching the Corsair's power. It was an engineering admission of defeat, an attempt to fight the Corsair on its own terms that could never succeed given Japan's industrial limitations. The Japanese also introduced new aircraft types. The Kawanishi N1KJ was designed specifically to counter American fighters like the Corsair. With heavy armament, armor protection, and good performance, it was a formidable opponent. But it arrived too late and in too small numbers to make a difference. By the time significant numbers reached combat units, most of Japan's experienced pilots were dead. Lieutenant Naoshi Kano, one of Japan's most aggressive aces with over 30 victories, developed specialized anti-sky tactics. His method involved approaching from directly below at maximum climb rate, firing one devastating burst, then stalling away before the Corsair could react. On December 17, 1943, Kano successfully destroyed 2 Corsairs using this technique. But when he attempted it a third time, Lieutenant Robert Hansen of VMF 215 was waiting. Understanding Kano's pattern, Hansen dove through his own formation and caught the Japanese ace in a climbing turn. 650 caliber guns ended Kano's career in 2 seconds. Even Japan's best could no. Simpson Harbor was a graveyard of sunken ships. The 100,000 Japanese troops stationed there were cut off, left to wither on the vine as the war passed them by. It had been achieved not through costly invasion, but through air power, with the Corsair as the principal instrument. By January 1944, American Corsairs owned the sky over the Solomons. Japanese daylight operations ceased entirely. Raids were conducted at night or in weather that grounded American fighters. The few remaining experienced Japanese pilots were withdrawn to defend the inner perimeter. In their place stood boys who could barely fly, much less fight. They died in droves, sometimes entire formations wiped out without achieving a single victory. Lieutenant Sadamu Kamachi, one of the few surviving Japanese aces, wrote in his diary, "Today, I watched 12 of our fighters engage 8 American Corsairs. Within minutes, 9 of ours were falling in flames. The survivors fled. I did not attempt to help. What could one more zero do? The war in the air is lost. We are already dead. Our bodies simply haven't realized it yet." The Corsair's impact extended beyond mere victory tallies. Strategic bombing missions previously impossible due to Japanese interception now proceeded unmolested. American ground forces advanced with continuous close air support. Supply lines that had required massive fighter escort now operated under Corsair umbrella coverage from scattered island bases. The aircraft's 1,000-mile range meant nowhere in the Solomons was safe from American air power. Marine First Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh's actions on August 15th and 30th, 1943, epitomized the Corsair's dominance. On the 15th, outnumbered 6-1, Walsh dove repeatedly into a Japanese formation attacking American shipping, destroying 2 dive bombers and 1 fighter despite his Corsair being hit repeatedly. The armor plating saved his life. Post-flight inspection revealed over 50 bullet holes in his aircraft, none of which penetrated to vital areas. 2 weeks later, on August 30th, after his engine failed during an escort mission, Walsh landed at Mund, jumped into another Corsair, and took off to rejoin his flight. Encountering 50 Zeros alone over Kahili, he attacked without hesitation. In the ensuing melee, he shot down 4 enemy fighters before being shot down himself. He survived, bailing out over the ocean and spending hours in his life raft before being rescued by a flying boat. He received the Medal of Honor and returned to combat. By war's end, his score stood at 21 victories, all in Corsairs, all against supposedly superior Japanese pilots. The technological gap widened with each Corsair variant. The F4U-1A incorporated a bubble canopy for improved visibility, addressing one of the aircraft's few weaknesses. The seat was raised 7 inches, further improving the pilot's view. The F4U-1C mounted 4 20mm cannons instead of machine guns, each with 120 rounds. The hitting power was devastating. A single burst could tear the wing off a Zero. The F4U-1D could carry 2 1,000-pound bombs or 8 5-inch rockets in addition to its guns. Later variants could carry tiny TIM rockets, napalm tanks, or even a torpedo. Each improvement addressed lessons learned in combat, modifications incorporated within months of identification. When pilots complained about carbon monoxide seeping into the cockpit, engineers redesigned the exhaust system. When the tailwheel strut proved too stiff for carrier landings, it was modified with softer oleos. When pilots wanted better radio equipment, new sets were installed. Japanese aircraft development, strangled by resource shortages and industrial limitations, couldn't match this pace of innovation. February 1944 marked 1 year since the Corsair's combat debut. In 12 months, Marine and Navy Corsair squadrons had destroyed over 600 Japanese aircraft while losing fewer than 80 to enemy action. The 11-to-1 kill ratio represented not just tactical superiority, but strategic revolution. Air superiority, once Japan's greatest advantage, had become America's guarantee of victory. The numbers were staggering. Corsair squadrons were achieving extraordinary kill ratios in engagement after engagement. Individual pilots were becoming aces in single missions. Japanese formations were being annihilated without inflicting any losses on their attackers. It wasn't combat, it was execution. The Japanese knew it, the Americans knew it, and both sides understood what it meant for the war's outcome. Captain Minoru Gender, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack and Japan's foremost aerial strategist, assessed the situation with characteristic honesty in a report to the Naval General Staff. The Corsair has made our entire naval aviation doctrine obsolete. We trained for 20 years to fight a war that no longer exists. The Americans changed the rules, built a better aircraft, and trained better pilots. We cannot catch up. We can only die with honor. The human cost was staggering. Japan lost approximately 2,000 naval aviators in the Solomons campaign, the majority to Corsairs. These were not just pilots, but instructors, squadron commanders, and tactical innovators. Irreplaceable expertise accumulated over decades. The pre-war Japanese Navy had required 3 years to train a carrier pilot. By 1944, they were sending boys to combat with less than 6 months of training. The results were predictable and tragic. American losses, while significant, were sustainable. Industrial production delivered Corsairs faster than combat consumed them. By 1944, WWII was producing 300 Corsairs per month, one every 82 minutes. Goodyear and Brewster added their production under license as FG and F3A variants respectively. Pilot training programs expanded exponentially since Pearl Harbor, provided qualified replacements who arrived in theater better prepared than their predecessors. Each generation of Corsair pilots was more lethal than the last, a compound interest of combat experience and institutional knowledge. The Corsair's psychological warfare value matched its physical destructiveness. Tokyo Rose, the English-language propaganda broadcaster, acknowledged the aircraft's impact in her nightly transmissions, warning American pilots that the whistling death brings death to those who fly it as well. But her threats rang hollow. Japanese pilots knew the truth. When Corsairs appeared, survival meant running, and even running might not be enough. Major Gregory Pappy Boyington's final combat illustrated both the Corsair's power and its limits. On January 3, 1944, leading a sweep over Rabaul, Boyington shot down his 26th and 27th victims before being shot down himself. His Corsair was hit by ground fire and enemy fighters, finally succumbing to cumulative damage. He survived, bailing out over the ocean and spending hours in his life raft before being rescued by a flying boat. He received the Medal of Honor and returned to combat. By war's end, his score stood at 21 victories, all in Corsairs, all against supposedly superior Japanese pilots. The technological gap widened with each Corsair variant. The F4U-1A incorporated a bubble canopy for improved visibility, addressing one of the aircraft's few weaknesses. The seat was raised 7 inches, further improving the pilot's view. The F4U-1C mounted 4 20mm cannons instead of machine guns, each with 120 rounds. The hitting power was devastating. A single burst could tear the wing off a Zero. The F4U-1D could carry 2 1,000-pound bombs or 8 5-inch rockets in addition to its guns. Later variants could carry tiny TIM rockets, napalm tanks, or even a torpedo. Each improvement addressed lessons learned in combat, modifications incorporated within months of identification. When pilots complained about carbon monoxide seeping into the cockpit, engineers redesigned the exhaust system. When the tailwheel strut proved too stiff for carrier landings, it was modified with softer oleos. When pilots wanted better radio equipment, new sets were installed. Japanese aircraft development, strangled by resource shortages and industrial limitations, couldn't match this pace of innovation. February 1944 marked 1 year since the Corsair's combat debut. In 12 months, Marine and Navy Corsair squadrons had destroyed over 600 Japanese aircraft, while losing fewer than 80 to enemy action. The 11-to-1 kill ratio represented not just tactical superiority, but strategic revolution. Air superiority, once Japan's greatest advantage, had become America's guarantee of victory. The numbers were staggering. Corsair squadrons were achieving extraordinary kill ratios in engagement after engagement. Individual pilots were becoming aces in single missions. Japanese formations were being annihilated without inflicting any losses on their attackers. It wasn't combat, it was execution. The Japanese knew it, the Americans knew it, and both sides understood what it meant for the war's outcome. The strategic implications rippled across the Pacific. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's death in April 1943, shot down by P-38 Lightnings, made possible by Corsair's suppression of Japanese fighters, eliminated Japan's most capable naval strategist. The isolation and reduction of Rabaul, achieved through Corsair air superiority, removed Japan's most important base without invasion. The Marine island hopping campaign accelerated, each landing supported by Corsair squadrons that guaranteed American forces would never again fight without air cover. The Philippines campaign of 1944 saw Corsairs operating from both land bases and carriers. By then, the initial carrier landing problems had been solved through a combination of pilot training and aircraft modifications. Marine squadrons VMF-124 and VMF-213 operated from the USS Essex, providing both fleet defense and ground support. Their presence over Leyte Gulf helped ensure American victory in history's largest naval battle. The Corsair even changed carrier operations doctrine. Initially rejected for carrier use, British Royal Navy pilots developed techniques to safely land the difficult aircraft on flight decks. The curved approach pattern they pioneered became standard for all carrier aircraft. Their success convinced the U.S. Navy to reconsider, and by late 1944, Corsairs were operating from American carriers. By war's end, Corsairs operated from dozens of carriers, extending their deadly reach across the entire Pacific. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's most famous surviving ace, encountered Corsairs over Wima in June 1944. Despite his vast experience, over 60 victories, he barely survived. His Zero was riddled with bullets, his cockpit filled with smoke, and only exceptional flying skill allowed him to escape. His assessment was blunt. Fighting Corsairs in a Zero was like fighting a modern tank with a cavalry sword. Brave, perhaps, but stupid and fatal. The Marianas Campaign of June 1944 demonstrated the Corsair's maturity as a weapon system. During the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot on June 19th, although the Hellcat was the primary Navy fighter involved, Marine Corsair squadrons operating from island bases contributed to the slaughter. Japanese naval aviation lost over 400 aircraft in a single day, most to American fighters. The kill ratios were so lopsided that American pilots felt guilty about the slaughter. It wasn't combat, it was target practice. The numbers told the complete story. By August 1945, Corsairs had destroyed 2,140 Japanese aircraft in air-to-air combat. They had dropped 15,621 tons of bombs. 70% of all bombs delivered by U.S. Navy and Marine fighters during the Pacific War. Over 400 Japanese ships had been sunk or damaged by Corsair attacks. The aircraft that couldn't initially operate from carriers had become the most successful naval fighter in history. Production would continue until 1953, with 12,571 Corsairs built, the longest production run of any World War II fighter. At Okinawa, Corsairs proved invaluable in defeating kamikaze attacks. Their speed allowed them to intercept suicide aircraft before they reached the fleet. Their firepower ensured that kamikazes once hit were destroyed completely, rather than damaged and still able to complete their mission. Marine pilots called it turkey shooting, but it was deadly serious business. A single kamikaze getting through could sink a destroyer or damage a carrier. But statistics couldn't capture the human dimension. Each destroyed Zero meant a dead or captured Japanese pilot, someone's son, husband, father. The gradual realization among Japanese aviators that they faced not just defeat but annihilation created a fatalistic atmosphere. Kamikaze tactics born from desperation represented the final acknowledgement that conventional air combat against Corsairs was suicide with less purpose. Young Inen Teo Yamamoto, arriving at Rabaul in March 1944 with just 90 hours total flight time, survived exactly one encounter with Corsairs. His diary, recovered after the war, contained a single entry: "Saw the bent-winged devils today. 3 of my training class are dead. I ran. I am ashamed, but I am alive. Tomorrow I will probably join them. The Americans are not fighting fair. They are simply executing us." The Corsair's legacy extended beyond World War II. In Korea, Corsairs flew 80% of all U.S. Navy and Marine close support missions. The F4U-5 variant, with its 2,300 horsepower engine, could carry 4,000 pounds of ordnance. Lieutenant G. Bordelong became the Navy's only ace in Korea and the only prop ace flying a Corsair night fighter, shooting down 5 North Korean aircraft. French Navy Corsairs fought in Indochina, supporting Foreign Legion troops at Dien Bien Phu. The aircraft remained in production until 1953, serving with numerous air forces worldwide. The Corsair even had a final combat appearance in 1969 during the soccer war between Honduras and El Salvador. Both sides flew Corsairs, making it the last piston-engine fighter combat in history. Captain Fernando Staeff of the Honduran Air Force shot down 3 Salvadoran aircraft, including 2 Corsairs, making him possibly the last piston-engine fighter ace in history. It was a fitting end for an aircraft that had revolutionized air combat. Admiral John S. McCain Sr., surveying the Air War's progression, noted, "The Corsair didn't just defeat Japanese air power, it obliterated it. We went from struggling for survival to absolute dominance in 18 months. No single aircraft has ever changed the character of warfare so completely in so short a time." Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific, was even more direct. "The Corsair gave us air superiority wherever and whenever we needed it. Without the Corsair, the island-hopping campaign would have been impossible. It was the key that unlocked Japanese defenses across the Pacific." The final testament came from an unexpected source. Emperor Hirohito, in his post-war memoir, identified 3 factors that made Japan's defeat inevitable: American industrial capacity, the atomic bomb, and the Corsair fighter. "When our pilots could no longer contest the skies," he wrote, "our islands became indefensible. The Corsair was the sword that cut the empire's lifeline." Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, who survived the war with 64 victories, provided perhaps the most eloquent assessment. "The Zero was a rapier, light, agile, deadly in skilled hands. The Corsair was a broadsword, heavy, powerful, crushing everything in its path. In the hands of a samurai, the rapier is superior, but the Americans had 10 broadswords for every rapier we possessed, and they didn't need to be samurai to use them effectively." On a humid morning in September 1945, as American occupation forces landed in Japan, a formation of Marine Corsairs flew overhead. Their bent wings cast shadows over Tokyo Bay, where 2 years earlier, Japanese pilots had been supreme. The war was over, but the message was clear. The age of the samurai of the sky had ended. The age of American air power, born in the crucible of the Solomons and forged in the engine of the Corsair, had begun. The last Japanese ace to face Corsairs in combat, Lieutenant Kaneyoshi Muto, survived the war with 18 victories. Asked years later about fighting the American fighter, he smiled sadly. "You want to know about fighting Corsairs? Here is the truth. You didn't fight Corsairs. You survived them if you were very lucky and very fast. Most of us were neither. The bent-winged bird was death itself, and death always wins in the end." The physical evidence of the Corsair's dominance lies scattered across the Pacific. On islands from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, the aluminium skeletons of crashed aircraft tell their stories. But the ratio is telling. For every Corsair wreck found, researchers discovered 10 or more Japanese aircraft. Some were shot down in combat, others were destroyed on the ground. Many were simply abandoned when their pilots were killed and no replacements existed to fly them. Marine Corps archives contain thousands of gun camera footage reels, each showing the final moments of Japanese aircraft. The films are remarkably similar. A Zero or Vow or Betty filling the gun sight. The flash of strikes as .50 caliber rounds impact. Pieces flying off, fire erupting, the enemy aircraft tumbling out of frame. What the films don't show is the human cost. The young men, Japanese and American alike, who died in those aluminum coffins falling from the sky. In the depths of the Pacific Ocean, scattered across thousands of miles, rest the aluminium bones of fallen aircraft, Zeros and Corsairs alike. They bear silent witness to the air war's savage intensity. But the ratio tells the tale. For every Corsair on the ocean floor, 11 Zeros rest beside it. The calculus of victory, written in metal and measured in lives, proved that when technology, training, and industrial might converged, the result was not battle, but execution. The Corsair had not just won a war, it had revolutionized the very nature of air combat, proving that superior technology properly employed could overcome any advantage in skill or experience.